Okay, so we're going to continue this morning a series that we started a couple weeks ago that we've been calling Intuitive Inshmuative, which is our culture's way of saying there are things in life that we treat as intuitive, and yet typically they're not. There are these things in life that maybe you'd say these lessons, this knowledge that is extraordinarily important to know, and oftentimes we interact in our lives and relationally as though it's, anybody knows it, kind of common sense type stuff, but in fact it's not, and the bad thing is living well kind of requires that we know this stuff, but we take it for granted because we had great parents or we had a particular good experience at school or with a coach or with a teacher or with a youth leader or at a church or something like that, and then what happens is we think we're so darn intelligent because we think we know that just because of our IQ, and we forget that someone taught it to us. That's kind of the way it goes. So we talked a couple weeks ago about strengths and simply suggested that our friend Jessica was here actually from MSU Billings, and you might remember that we tried to marry her off, and we also, which by the way she thanked me for. That's totally a joke. But we did just talk, she talked about strength. She does a lot of strength instruction at MSU Billings and simply suggested that playing to our strengths is counterintuitive, that we live in a culture that tells us that well-rounded individuals are what we all should be and what we're all made to be. And in fact, she said, well, wait a minute, the scriptures seem to indicate otherwise. And quite frankly, modern psychology would seem to indicate otherwise too. And your wife tells you that all the time, like you've got a couple things you're good at and you're terrible at everything else. That's kind of what she was communicating. So she talked about that, which, by the way, there's a whole conversation following that, and if you would like to be a part of any of there's going to be an intensive in this really ritzy cabin here in a month or so, so if you would like to be a part of that, it's not too late. And then last week we talked about discipleship, which is a church word for like, how do we grow in our relationship with Jesus? The implications are that his interest isn't just to get you into heaven, but for you to have relationship with him and to walk with him, and that following him restores your full humanity. And really what it was kind of a cultural look for us as a church to simply acknowledge first that we said from the very beginning that discipleship, it happens different for all of us, that what works for you might not work for me, like the processes that you might go through to become a healthy Christ follower might not work for your friend, but the problem is people like myself have experiences, and then we start prescribing them. And we start expecting that because it worked for me, it'll work for you. If you love Jesus enough, it'll work for you, and if not, then read your Bible more. And what we said is, well, wait a minute, it looks different for all of us. I mean, there's some core stuff, but it looks different for all of us. And then we said, well, I said the we, I meant me, but we're all in this together, right? Just being sarcastic about my own egotism. So then we just simply said, here's the danger, is if we as a culture agree that discipleship looks different for all of us, then the next step is if we're not careful, we assume that it's intuitive, that all you need is a Bible and a brain, and you can figure out how to follow Jesus. And we said, well, that doesn't seem to be the case either. That Jesus indicates, his life indicates, that following him is something that transfers through relationship. That while it looks different for all of us, learning from somebody and teaching somebody else seems to be the key there. Like the way we talked about it is that we all need a Paul and we all need a Timothy, and sorry for the gender exclusivity of that. It's not because I'm sexist, it's just because Paul and Timothy are in the Bible. And so you go Pauline and well, that doesn't work either. Like Pollyanna, she's in a story of some kind, and Timothyana, if that helps. That's kind of a Chris joke. Anyway, so what we're saying is we all need both of those relationships. This weekend, we've titled this weekend 800 Big Hair, for reasons some of you already understand, and the rest of you will understand it shortly. Because this weekend we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about finances, which means like whammy, right? Like, dang it, I picked that weekend. Remember those whammies, the cartoon guys with the capes? Anybody remember those, that game show? Or what that makes you is old. I just want you to know that. Because I was telling Lenny, like, dude, we should show a video of the whammies. Like, he's like, what are you talking about? And Sarah's like, what are you talking about? So we pulled it up on Wikipedia. Ready for this? Daytime game show from 1983 to 1986, which means about half the room was wearing diapers, so makes the rest of us old. Seriously though, it means like whammy, right? Like some of you are like, I haven't been to church in eons and I've been wanting to check this place out, and here I am, and I knew it. I knew all you people talk about is money. I knew it. And we're just confirming those suspicions. But we're going to talk about money in this vein, that quite frankly, talking about money is counterintuitive in my view. That we don't like to talk about our finances, and it is incredibly counterintuitive for some very good reasons. I mean, some of you have been a part of contexts, movements, maybe even cults, where it wasn't counterintuitive to talk about money. It was kind of the exact opposite, like it was all that was talked about. And thus, you were wounded, and you're still recovering from that. And you look at guys like me and movements like this with a great deal of suspicion, and in many ways, it's been earned. I think for some of us, maybe the majority of us, or maybe I'm just projecting my own experience, but it's uncomfortable because we grew up in a home that was a great home and where finances were there and budgets were there, but we never talked about them. Like, your parents didn't ever talk to you about money. They didn't ever talk to you about how to manage your money, which that's not just to throw them under the bus. I think the downside of that is, what that means is, by the time you have your own money and you start managing your own finances, what you've been taught is it's intuitive. That because you took math, because you took Algebra 1 your sophomore year of high school, like, you should know how to manage finances. When in fact, those of us who most of us would affirm, like, no, it's not intuitive. It's uncomfortable because we all have opinions on this subject. There's a lot of things we could pick to talk about. Most of them make my job easier because you show up without much of an opinion, and part of my job is to make you care about it and then to kind of help go from there. This isn't one of those. You all care about it. Like, we all care about finances, and it's uncomfortable because all of our finances are limited. Like, you know how much money you need to feel like you don't need any more? Like, you know how much money you need to feel like you'll be okay, like your family will be okay? Like, okay, if I could get to that point, if I could get to 25,000, if I could get to 50,000, if I could get to 100,000, if I could get to 250,000, you know how much money you need to get to the point where you don't need any more? More. That's the answer. It's hard to talk about money because all of us have limited resources, and all of us could use more. And thus, it's uncomfortable. But could we also agree that, okay, it's uncomfortable, but is it also important? I mean, it's uncomfortable, but is it also healthy to not just trust your own intuitions when it comes to managing finances, to not just trust your own background, to not just trust your own experiences? It's uncomfortable, but is anybody ready to say it's intuitive? That because you know basic math and basic arithmetic, you know how to manage finances? You know what I think is maybe the greatest evidence that managing finances isn't intuitive? The fact that I've been through 20 years of formal education, 20 years, which isn't to brag, but like 20 years, never taken a single class on personal finances. Been to a Christian grad school, been to a great post-secondary school, been through high school, like, right? Not a single class, not because I avoided it. I don't know of one that was offered. If that doesn't testify that we're a culture that we treat finances as intuitive, then I don't know what is. And so we're going to talk about finances even though they're uncomfortable. But we're going to do this in a little bit different way this morning. I want to talk about me. And which you're going like, yeah, that's all you ever do, Adam. I said last week, like, I'm sorry, I'm going to use myself as an example a lot. I'm going to continue that apology into this week, and then next week you can bring tomatoes and throw them at me if I continue to use myself as an example, because I too don't want to be that guy. But we're going to do that this week. And I'm not going to talk about myself in terms of my own personal finances, because I've been there. I've had that scary moment. I've been embarrassed. I've been to that place, right, where I had to acknowledge, like, I'm dumb. My wife and I have been there. We've had to seek outside wisdom in our personal finances. We've learned the value of that. I want to talk about it in the vein of myself leading a church called Narrate, a movement that, like it or not, has a financial picture. Because if you know me, I would hope that you would know that one of my least favorite things in the world to do is to use the word church and money in the same sentence. I have a strong reluctance to talk about money and interweave it with a conversation about Jesus. And so here's what I want to do this morning. Is first, I guess I'm hoping that my story will tell you that I empathize with your position, that it's hard. I get that. And at the same time, I want to invite you into some stuff, my own heart a little bit, and allow you to see some of the stuff that I feel like God has been teaching me. And essentially what I'm going to do is extend that challenge back to you. Talking about money is extremely uncomfortable. And I'm going to argue for very good reason, like those that you're about to see. Right? That's all you got to say is like, right? In fact, I was talking to Lenny. Lenny showed me this clip on Thursday, and he and Sarah and I were talking about it on Friday morning, and he said, that was not a joyful task you gave me, Adam. I had to watch hours and hours of footage on YouTube of what he called psychopaths. And he thinks that the guy with the glasses, that wasn't a spoof. I was like, where'd you find the spoof guy? He's like, no, I think that guy was serious. About a year ago, I was having lunch with a couple 50-something friends who were entrepreneurs in this town and have been for a few decades. They were new friends at the time. They're great friends now. And they made it clear to me in the days leading up to that lunch, and even in the opening moments of the lunch, that they loved what was going on around Narrate. And I knew that they were excited about Jesus in ways they never had been before since walking with us. That they were thrilled to see what was going on. And quickly they turned the conversation, and they began to press in, and they began to say things like, Adam, we understand that doing church the way that we're talking about doing church, the way we're doing church, the way we're being the church, that involves money. Like, we're entrepreneurs, we get that. And what they started to do was press in on me and go, so why aren't you talking about it? They understood there's a real budget. Adam, why aren't you talking about it? And what was coming out of them was an honest anxiety, like, Adam, if you're careless on this church is going to go away, and we don't want that. And what that allowed me to do is kind of come up out of my skin in a little bit of a passion area and go, you guys, you're why I don't talk about that. Because we want to be the kind of church where someone who hasn't had conversation with Jesus or considered Jesus ever or in recent history to come, and we don't want money to be the stumbling block. And quite frankly, for the vast majority of our culture, money is an enormous stumbling block to that conversation. We don't want it to be you guys sitting right in front of me. That's why we do it that way. That's why we offer so much apology. That's why we're so reluctant. And I guess if you're a guest and you're them, like, I'm proud that we're the kind of church that makes that a place that makes this a safe place for you to consider Jesus. And what I need to say to you this morning is that's our bent. And for the most part will continue to be. And so I'm just going to ask you to trust me. 30 minutes, you don't know me enough to trust me, but just hear me out. When I was in high school, I think I was about a freshman, I was driving with my dad, and we'd passed this church in Billings, and we passed this church that had a brand new big old chunk of property, and they'd just built this new building. And he wasn't connected with the church at the time, nor was I. He would have called himself a Christian, so would have I. And as we drove by this church, I don't remember precisely what he said, but it basically amounted to, that's sick. Right? Like, here's a guy who has worked for the railroad since he was 18 years old. He's worked hard for every penny he's ever made, like so many others of us, you. And it just bugged him deep in his guts. And he said something to the effect of, it's just wrong that place takes those people's money and does that with it. He's thinking of himself, like all of us, young families struggling to survive, and those people telling them to give them some of their money. Now, 10 years later, do I have a little bit different perspective? Not 10, I wish it was only 10. However many years later, do I have a little bit different perspective on the resources that went into building that place? Of course. A little bit different perspective on giving and how that goes down? Yeah, absolutely. But that thing, that experience, that moment, people like my dad who don't have a problem with Jesus but have never connected with a movement and never got to experience church in a healthy way. And the fact that money would be that hang-up, that bugs me, it bugs us. You wouldn't be here if it didn't bug you too. It's kind of gross. When we started Narrate, there was a couple really strong convictions I had, and it was one of those, like, I didn't necessarily know I had them. I didn't write them down. I didn't have them, like, put in a plaque on the engraver and put them above my headboard or anything, but there's a couple things that I felt really strongly about. The first is that money's best left untalked about. I just want to talk about it, particularly when it comes to church and ministry. And the other one, which I think was more theological than anything, was this idea that if God is in it, then he'll take care of it. And if you're new to church, like, in it is churchy language for, like, if God's behind it, if God believes in it, if God is blessing it, if it's God's thing, then God will take care of it. And particularly the council can testify to my posture from the very beginning was, we're going to be faithful, we're going to be aggressive, we're going to be generous, almost to a fault, and we're just going to assume that the money will follow. Like, we're just going to do our thing, and that doesn't mean we're going to be, like, careless, but we're going to be aggressive and generous, and we're just going to assume that the money thing takes care of itself. What's been helpful for me in the last couple of months is to see kind of where that came from. Many of you have heard me talk about Fred, and it's a guy who poured into me like the Paul thing that I talked about last week that I would hope for all of you to have. The time I was 19 till the time I was about 31, met with him every other week. I'm hugely indebted to the way he influenced me. Let me tell you a little of his story just to kind of help you understand the culture around here. He started following Jesus when he was 19. He became a school teacher at Billings West, was the tennis coach, decided to quit doing that after a few years, and went to work selling insurance. Was very good at selling insurance. Was also being poured into by a group of kind of grassroots people, kingdom people who were a generation older than him in Billings, and there were people who would love Narrate. There were people who embodied this vision, and they were connected with local churches too, but just kind of, both end gospel kind of people, like serve people, talk to people about Jesus, the full gamut. Investing in him. They helped him get connected, and he was basically the volunteer leader of Young Life at this time in Billings. In his 30s or so, he transitioned out of student ministry. He had kids of his own, right? That's kind of how that typically goes. And he started just pouring into people and pouring into couples, and he would set aside his lunch hours and oftentimes breaks in the morning and the afternoon where he'd walk with people and just talk to them about the Lord. He was connected to a church, but I'm not kidding. By the time I met him, there's few that would argue about the fact that there probably wasn't a church in town leading more people to Jesus or discipling more people. It's crazy the influence he had. And what happened was he developed this bent. Him and his wife began to dream, and they said, because they were having people over for dinner, and they were having these crazy Bible studies with like Acts kind of stories, of people literally in the basement, and he was teaching upstairs. They had this dream like, what if we could retire at 50, live off the interest, and do our ministry for free? And that became their goal, and they continued to be generous with their stuff, but they also began to save aggressively, and at 50, they achieved that. They retired. And he did just that. He went to work and moved into an office on the south side with a guy who was also kind of a part of his network of friends, and he began to meet with people. Today, he meets with 8 people a day, Monday through Friday, right? And then has dinners with people several times a week and has Bible studies. I mean, a busy dude. So in a couple years before I came here, and was processing Narrate, candidly, the money part of planning a church was the part that I was most uncomfortable with, and I would always process that with him. And he would say, Adam, I don't ever talk about money. Because his salary was covered by himself, but there's still ministry needs, there's still rent, there's still utilities, there's still Bibles for folks, there's still books for folks, there's still new tires for single moms, right? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. So I don't ever talk about money. And there's more money in our ministry account than there's ever been. Like, I don't talk about it, and then it just kind of shows up. That's where that happened. Because that's the way he encouraged me. Like, Adam, just do your thing, and it'll take care of itself. And then in this season where I felt like God was really starting to tear at me on this stuff, I had coffee with a guy who lives in Helena, has been here for several years, graduated from Carroll, not connected to Narrate. He's a God-fearing Catholic guy. We were actually meeting because of the Something About Mary series and a conversation there. But he's from Billings, and he knows Fred, and his dad knows Fred, and he just kind of knows the network. And I was having this conversation with him because he's actually raising funds on his own right in Helena to do some ministry with college students. And I was sharing with him that, like, if God's in it thing, and the tension that I've always said to counsel, like, guys, all we can do is just go forward, and like, if it collapses, then I guess God wasn't in it. He said, Adam, did it ever occur to you that, like, Fred was the second generation of what he's doing? That, the needs were just getting met, but essentially he was doing his thing on a foundation that was put in place by some doctors and attorneys and businessmen that poured into him. And also that he's 60-ish now, that he's been pouring into lives for 40 years, that the money's coming in, yes, but there's been this incredible foundation laid. I said, never thought of it quite like that. And then I was having a coffee with another guy. I told you it was all about me this morning. And he's an Edward Jones type guy. Coming through town, friend said, hey, can we have coffee? Yeah, let's have coffee. And, he talks about money for a living. So I was like, let's talk about money, right? And so I was sharing all this with him, and he knows Fred as well. And he said, yeah, and Adam, he's 60, which means the people he's doing ministry with, they're at the peak of their earning potential. And those two things were, I think, enough to cause me to go, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if this general sentiment that if God's in it, he just blesses it and we don't have to talk about money because that's just kind of the way it works, like God blesses things, because that's what I experienced with Fred. What if that's kind of a half-truth? What if it's even unhealthy, particularly as a leader, like charged with like helping people think through spirituality and religion? Like, what if Adam, that's not a positive attribute like you're so proud of? What if it's actually negative? So what do? You open the text and you go, okay, Jesus, help me. There's a few passages that just kind of popped off the page for me. In Mark, it says this: on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple area and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, is it not written? My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've made it a den of robbers. Now, there's a lot of stuff exegetically going on here that I'm not going to touch. What struck me was Jesus didn't avoid the topic. And broaching the subject didn't create any fewer problems for him than it might for me. Like, not only did he not avoid the subject, he didn't keep it to a personal one-on-one conversation. He went right to the cultural center. And not only did he go right to the cultural center, he went and talked to a bunch of guys who didn't really want to hear what he had to say. In Luke 18, there's this parable there's a story often called the rich young ruler. It's not a parable, it's an interaction Jesus had. A certain ruler asked Jesus, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Why do you call me good? Jesus answered, no one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. Do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not give false testimony, honor your father and mother. All these I've kept since I was a boy, he said. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, you still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. When he heard this, he became very sad. Some translations say mad, because he was a man of great wealth. Jesus looked at him and said, how hard is it for the rich to enter the kingdom of God? Indeed, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Then those who heard, they asked, who then can be saved? And Jesus replied, what is impossible with men is possible with God. Peter said to him, we have left all we had to follow you. I tell you the truth, Jesus said to them, no one who has left home or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom of God will fail to receive many times as much in this age and in the age to come, eternal life. Here's what struck me. Remember, this is about me. Like, Jesus was so forthright that he would look at a guy and say, your problem's money. And I'm here to say, prior to this little season, I would not have said that. I've had the chance. I've had phone calls with people who love this place and are connected with this place. I've had lunches. I've had coffee. I've had interactions with people where they go, let's talk about giving. You know what I do? Nope. That's between you and the Lord. And in some way, I think that's true. Nope, not going to talk about that. But at what point is that an indictment on me as your spiritual leader? Like, at what point is that an indictment on my leadership? That's the stuff that started to occur to me. Think of Matthew 6. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus said something to these guys that you and I all know, but are terrified to say to one another. That the greatest threat to your relationship with God, it's not lust, it's not pornography, it's not sexuality, it's not alcohol, it's not drugs. It's your relationship with stuff. And that was like a punch in the stomach. Like that Jesus would say that, and yet I've created a culture where we would never say that. We would never get that candid with one another. We would never honestly help one another to see that. And the erosion continued of like, wait a minute, I thought this was our cultural strength. Maybe it's our cultural weakness. I thought this was to my credit. Maybe this is to our detriment. And then I stumbled into an article by a guy named Henry Nouwen. My friend Ben pointed me to this article. It was an article called The Spirituality of Fundraising. Now, you need to know that I would never have read an article titled The Spirituality of Fundraising were it not for who I heard wrote the article. Because I would have, I know what it says before I read it, right? That would have been my attitude. I can see that on late night TV or I can read it in this article. I don't want to. But when I heard it was Henry Nouwen, he's a reputable source to me. He was a priest, a very popular author, very thoughtful person in the, 70s, 80s, 90s. I don't know how early his influence went back. The basis of the article is that talking about money is an extension of vision. That the only way you are insecure about talking about money is if you're insecure about vision. That if there's vision in place, then talk about it. Because that's the way the kingdom rolls. That's the way God rolls. In fact, he tells a story in there about a guy who was particularly astute at raising funds for a ministry that he was quite passionate about. He has a meeting with this guy, gets into his office, was caught off guard by the borderline opulence of the guy's office. Said to the guy, wait a minute, you have the nerve to invite people into this office and ask them for money? The guy, he said, I ask for money standing up, not lying down. He said, my deal is vision. And inviting people into vision, how they interact, how they respond, that's their deal. I have a responsibility to share vision. And then I started thinking about us. I started thinking about Narrate. I began to go wait a minute. I think that's what my two friends over lunch were saying to me a year ago. Adam, we love what's going on here. Don't let it fall apart because of your own reluctance to talk about money and be honest there. There's several of you, 40 and 50-something men who we've had lunch, we've had coffee, we're friends, and there's this theme. Adam, there's great stuff going on. Why would you not invite people to get behind that? We started a movement. We said, let's gather and scatter. Let's create this whole new type of church culture in our community where we say, let's get together on Sunday and let's wrestle with the text and let's create resources that we can use throughout the week. Let's wrestle with who Jesus really is, and then let's agree to not do that again. Let's agree to not be church consumers, but the church. Let's agree to not get ourselves busy doing Bible studies and prayer groups and all these things that are doing church. Let's agree to do it once and then get out of here and be the church and serve people. I would say we're doing that. I'm not going to ask you to raise hands, but I know that the majority of us are people who, if you were to go what was my church before Narrate, you'd go, you mean in 1986? You mean when I was 12? The majority of the movement are people who didn't have one. You didn't have one. And what makes me more excited, we're not a next-gen church. We're not a 20-something church, and we're certainly not an emergent church. We're this balanced church. Now, do I love the fact that there's a lot of young people here? Young families? Absolutely. Here's an interaction that I guarantee I'll have. I have it at least once a month. It's a mom or parents or a dad, doesn't really matter, who comes with their kid. They might be in junior high. They might be in high school. They might be 24 and married with 2 kids. After coming a couple times with them, the mom will approach me and say, hey, thanks. For what? My daughter won't go to my church. I've got a church. I love my church. My son, he won't go. He won't have anything to do with it. But they love it here. Thank you. I have that interaction literally at least once a month. In fact, I had lunch with the gal this week. It was this very scenario. Her daughter moved back from college. Her daughter wants nothing to do with her church. She likes her church, isn't connected, and that's great. The mom does, and so she's been bringing her here to try to get her connected. Over lunch, she said, I came to the 11 o'clock service last week, Adam. And I thought, where are all those young people coming from? And I'm going, She's like, I know what church she goes to. I know it's a good church. I know it's one of the biggest churches in town. She said, there aren't people that young at our church. And I'm going, hyperbole, right? She said that. Her daughter stopped her and said, yes, there is, Mom. And she named a girl. That put it in perspective. There's one. I don't say that to brag. I say I'm proud of the fact that we are a young church, but I'm just as proud of the fact that we're not just a young church. That there are lots of 40 and 50 and 60-something, sorry if I just called you not young, people who are reconnecting with Jesus for the first time. They're reconnecting for the first time in years. To me, the greatest energy boost I have is those of you who your head is on very square, very straight, and you love this place because you love the vision. We're a church of leadership. Like, we're a church where, I mean, you just pick the cross-section of culture. We could find them here. Someone that's pretty high in education, yep, we could find them. Entrepreneurs, yep. 60 or 30, yep. Like, it's a church of leadership, which is what we wanted, because we said, let's gather and scatter. Let's help one another. Let's let businessmen and business people and school leaders, and let's let them find opportunities for us to serve, and let's get behind them and help them. We're a church that's growing when almost every other church in town, even the very best churches, are not growing. We're a church plant in a town that's a church plant graveyard that's made it 18 months. There's a lot to be excited about. And then there's the scattering stuff. And I thought to myself, like, how do I not blow this by talking too much about the scattering stuff, and then Vision Weekend next year is lame because we already talked about it a bunch, and that's what I did last year. And then I thought, I'm just going to talk about Christmas, the week of Christmas. On Tuesday, I was walking down the street, back from lunch, ran into this guy who's a friend. He and I have been meeting quite regularly ever since I started coming to Helena once a month, 4 years ago. He's not a part of Narrate. We've agreed to disagree on spirituality. We're friends. We have coffee or lunch or something, every other month, or that type of friend. Good friend. He stopped me on the street, gave me an uncomfortably intimate hug. The type that says, like, my life's a wreck. Said, could I get some time with you? Sure, I said. So that afternoon, I met him at his house. I was late getting home because I spent over a couple hours with him. And in that interaction, we covered the gamut. But the big deal was he's in a relationship. They're not married, but they are married. They're close. They're living life together, and things have gone sideways. And what's he doing? He's just asking me for God's wisdom, but he's not. And I spent a couple hours with him, and at the end, kind of went like, hey, we've got these resources. Like, we've got this ministry that's this couple leading. We've got this thing called Prepare and Enrich. We've got this assessment. We've got all kinds of resources. Let us know if we can help you. Okay, he said. And right, that's the interaction where you go, I'll never hear from him again. So on the 23rd of December, the day before Christmas Eve, this is trivial, but I was thinking, like, I don't know how I'm going to structure my day tomorrow, because Christmas Eve is like my favorite day of the year, and I love those services, and yet they're at 3 and 5, and I'm kind of a creature of habit, and so, like, normally I'd be in my office at 7 a.m. getting ready for the message, but I can't, so what am I going to do, and blah, 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 you don't care. Anyway, it's like 9 o'clock at night, my phone rings, and it's my friend, and he said, hey, her and I would like to meet with you. When could we do that? And then he starts apologizing, knowing that it's Christmas. And I said, well, I don't know, this is kind of perfect. I could be at your house at 8 in the morning tomorrow. Okay, he said. So I drove over to his house and spent a couple hours. Again, it's nothing that any one of you who follows Jesus couldn't have said, and yet I wasn't saying it. It was just the wisdom of God, right? It's the stuff we all need at certain times in our life. And I left there, and I literally remember as I was putting my key into my door of my car thinking, I don't care what else happens today. Like, this day is a success. I just got to spend 2 hours with this guy that many of us have been reaching out with for a long time, and this is amazing. And then on Christmas Eve, before the 3 o'clock service, I got to walk up to our friends Patty and Marvin, who delivered a Christmas tree to a family who had 3 kids. 2 of them were pretty extremely disabled, and they went like, hey, can we help you with Christmas presents? Or I think they actually said, hey, can you help us with Christmas presents? And you all did. Like, you saw the picture on Facebook, this mountain of gifts and gift cards and meals. I got to walk up to Patty and Marvin at Christmas Eve and go, hey, so how'd that go? Right? Because, how emotional is that to show up with this massive pile of gifts? It was one of those interactions where nothing that was coming out of her mouth was doing justice to the look on her face. And then on Christmas Eve after the 5 o'clock service, okay, there's a little bit of context here. I was at Target on the 23rd buying Christmas lights. You might have seen them, and ornaments. And my phone rang, and it was a family from here going, hey, we heard of this single mom in our church. We'd love to help her, but we don't want her to know it's us helping. Okay, I said, and I'm thinking, like, yeah, we got a budget for that. What are you thinking? I trust you. These are leaders. They said, no, well, we want to write the check. We just don't want her to know who wrote the check. Okay, I said, so we arranged all that. So underneath my chair, both services, I've got this check in this envelope. After the 5 o'clock service, I know where to find her in the room, and I walk up to her, and I was awkward, which I normally am, and I just held this envelope out and really think ahead about how I was going to do this. I just went like this, and she what are you doing? And I said, just don't ask. Okay. So she's looking at it, and it's like, you just can't ask. Okay. So she opens it. It was a check for $1,000. What does she do but like turn into Niagara Falls, right? And my deep spiritual, emotional response, you just can't ask, I said. Like, incomplete. Like, you just can't ask. They don't want to know. They don't want you to know. Just show them the respect that you don't ask. Okay, she said. Now that's not about me. That's about us. We said let's plant this church that matters. You know what business people tell me? Several. In this town, that in most towns, the rule of business is by year 2, if you haven't hit your stride, you're sunk. They tell me that in this town, if you still exist by year 2, you're doing really well. And this isn't like one business guy's opinion. There's one friend who's had his own business for like 8 years, and he said, oh yeah, like it's still a good old boy thing for me. 8 years I've been doing this. Like, I think we're just getting started. The city asked me a week ago, I was talking with our friend Brad, you know how we finished the conversation? Hey, if there's anything I can do to help you guys. We're just getting started, which makes me think maybe that's why Jesus said some of the things he did. Like this in Luke 10. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. He told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Go. I'm sending you out like lambs among the wolves. Do not take a purse or a bag or sandals, and do not greet anyone on the road. Why no purse? Because you're going, well, because you'd get beat up, because guys don't carry purses, and so that would be a problem. That's the whole lambs thing. It's because the very first Jesus movement had this built into the ethos of it. That people will benefit, that they'll buy into the vision, and they'll resource it. Look at Luke 8. This is for all of you who thinks God is sexist. After this, Jesus traveled about from town to town and village, one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, along with some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, from whom 7 demons had come out, Johanna, the wife of Chuza, no idea if that's how you pronounce it, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. Check this out. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Even the very first Jesus movement, it wasn't, well, if God's in it, it'll take care of itself. It's well, people will support it. Now, here's maybe a bottom line. God is a God who would say, you got to talk about money. You've got to. In your own personal life, in your family life, you have to. And I guess what I'm trying to say vulnerably is he's also a God who I feel like has been challenging me in going, hey, Adam, good leaders do too. Good leaders do too. So let's just talk real candidly. We're going to go a little late this morning, but not very late. I just want to talk numbers, be candid in ways that maybe we haven't before. Here are expenses for May of 2009 through August of 2010. That's 16 months. We're basically $370,000. That's real money. The giving in that same season was $182,000. Some of you are going like, teacher, that doesn't balance, right? Like, that's called startup capital. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, put this in perspective a little bit. In September through December of 2010, the giving was $42,000. September through December of 2009, of 2010, it was $70,000. That's 40%. That's amazing. Generally speaking, we're incredibly encouraged. Here's some more numbers. The amount of capital on hand, September 1st of 2010, $36,000. So that's reserves that were left. We call them functional reserves because there's a little bit more in a different account, but that's more like worst case scenario to make sure that everybody that needs to get paid gets paid, you know. Money in the account Friday when I left the office, $22,000, $22,500. You can see that there's reason to be both incredibly encouraged and reason to go like, wow, yeah, This is real. Like, this is real. We're incredibly encouraged, grateful, and yet we have to grow. Like, that's just kind of the facts. Those of you that are giving, I want to say this to you. I don't know who you are. I wish I did. Someday I might. I don't right now. Thank you. Thanks. Here's my assessment of the situation. We are supported, just like Fred, by a foundation that was in place before we showed up. The generous, extraordinarily generous giving that's happened is coming from people who learned to give somewhere else. Those were seeds, you might say, that were sown somewhere else. That's a muscle that was built on people somewhere else. And to you, I say thanks. And the question that we must deal with in our future, me, us, is will we raise up a new generation of givers? Will we raise up a new generation of people who understand God's kingdom and giving and generosity? If you're someone who's found Jesus here, reconnected with Jesus here, I would say the question to you is, will you become a new giver, a new generation of generosity? Not just for our sake, but for the kingdom. I hope there's churches planted 40 years from now who are just like us, who the generosity isn't a result of them directly, but there was this upfront gift that came because a group of people who were doing life together in Helena in 2011 understood generosity. Will we raise up a new generation of generosity? Will we, those of us who have found Jesus here, will we develop a muscle that we hadn't had prior to this? The bottom line is we can do this. We have no intention of staying the size that we are, but we could do it with who we have. Our numbers don't indicate we're going to stay this size. We could do it. But we can't do it without everybody pulling. So I hope on one level this is all a big metaphor for you in your own finances and to think honestly and candidly about your need to seek God's wisdom there, the wisdom of others. And at the same time, a shift, I suppose, in my own leadership. Now, you're not going to see me on TV at midnight, I don't think, but nonetheless, let's pray. God, there's not any more emotionally charged subject that we could pick to talk about than this. And maybe for some of us, having just kind of stuck our head up to consider you for the first time in our lives, the timing was less than perfect. And I just pray that you would be with them. For others, this is extremely invasive and extremely uncomfortable. I just pray that you'd keep it from being shaming. Humbling perhaps, candid perhaps, sacrificial perhaps, but not shaming, God. God, it's our privilege to be your people in this community, and we trust you. Amen.